I never expected that a single day could change everything about me. I had always been just another face in the crowd at my high school, blending in and staying unnoticed, happy with my anonymity. That day started like any other, dragging through the last classes before the bell, the weight of boredom pressing down on me when the unthinkable happened. I was walking down the hallway, my backpack slung lazily over one shoulder, when I felt an unusual chill run through my body. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the faint hum of the school felt like it had been swallowed by an unnatural silence. I paused, looking around, but nothing seemed out of place. And yet, something in the air was off, something electric and impossible to ignore. By the time I reached my locker, my reflection in the metal door caught my attention. I froze. There was a subtle shift in my face, almost imperceptible at first. My jawline seemed softer, my cheeks slightly rounder, my lips fuller. I blinked, and when I looked again, my hair, which I had been too lazy to style that morning, had somehow lengthened and taken on a natural wave I had never seen on me before. Panic surged, twisting in my chest as I stumbled backward. This wasn't possible. I was just me, the same person I had always been. And yet, staring back at me in the reflection was someone who looked different. Someone unfamiliar, yet undeniably me. I slammed the locker shut and ran to the nearest restroom, needing confirmation that what I was seeing wasn't just a trick of the light or a sudden, weird daydream. The fluorescent bulbs in the mirror flickered like old film as I stepped closer, heart pounding. My hands trembled as I touched my face, tracing the softer contours, the delicate shape that had replaced the familiar hardness of my usual features. My fingers moved to my hair, now cascading past my shoulders in waves that caught the light with a softness I'd never known. Every detail screamed at me that something had changed in the most fundamental way possible. I was no longer the person I had been that morning. I barely recognized myself, yet I couldn't deny that there was something strange and magnetic in this new reflection. My eyes, wide and slightly brighter, seemed to carry a curiosity, a boldness I had never felt before. My body felt different too, lighter somehow, more nimble, almost like the weight of being invisible had lifted off my shoulders. But fear and disbelief clawed at me, mingling with an unexpected thrill. I ran my hands down my new form, taking in the curves that had replaced my once angular frame, the subtle tilt of my shoulders, the delicate shape of my waist. I was terrified, yet undeniably drawn into this unfamiliar version of myself. And then, almost instinctively, I began to experiment. I tugged at my shirt, feeling how it stretched differently across my chest, slid my hands down my arms, noticing the softness in ways I had never imagined. There was a surreal thrill to it, a dangerous temptation to explore this transformation further. I felt my reflection watching me, as if it was daring me to step into this new identity, to embrace it. My thoughts raced. Was this real? Was it magic, a trick of the universe, a dream? But it was real, and I had no choice but to face it. By the time the bell rang, my heart pounded in a mix of fear and exhilaration. Every instinct screamed at me to hide, to find a private corner and disappear until whatever was happening resolved itself. But curiosity, that stubborn spark that had always driven me to explore new ideas, new experiences, would not let me retreat. And so, with trembling hands and a pulse that felt ready to burst, I stepped out of the restroom and into the hallway, each step heavier with the weight of my secret. Every student I passed seemed suddenly monumental, every glance a potential trap. I felt exposed, yet alive in a way I had never known. It was during that first period, as I struggled to sit through the monotony of algebra, that I noticed something else. My classmates' reactions weren't quite what I expected. There were subtle glances, whispers that carried just beyond my comprehension. Some looked confused, others curious, and a few, surprisingly, seemed welcoming. The world felt off-kilter, shifting around me in response to my presence. It was as if being this new version of myself had altered not just me, but the way everyone interacted with me. By lunchtime, the reality of my situation began to settle in. I could no longer ignore it. I was no longer the person I had been. The transformation wasn't just skin deep, it had permeated my essence. My thoughts, my instincts, my very presence had changed. I was different, undeniably and irrevocably. And with that difference came a terrifying question. How would I navigate this new identity in a place where everyone knew the old me? How would I face the hallways, the classrooms, the cafeteria, the familiar faces that now looked at me with a mix of confusion and curiosity? As I sat there, hands gripping the edge of my lunch tray, I realized that this day would not be like any other. The bell, signaling the end of lunch and the start of the next period, felt like a drumbeat of fate. I was being forced into a world I had never imagined, where every glance, every word, every step would challenge me to redefine myself. And deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the disbelief, there was a flicker of something I hadn't expected: anticipation. Because despite the chaos, despite the unknown, there was an undeniable thrill in discovering who I might become. The bell had barely rung when I found myself standing in the crowded hallway, trying to make sense of the shifting dynamics around me. Every glance from my classmates seemed amplified, every whisper a tiny earthquake rattling my confidence. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, fragile and exposed, my new self teetering between discovery and disaster. The familiar hallways now seemed alien, corridors that I had known every brick of suddenly strange and full of hidden eyes. My chest tightened with every step, heart hammering against the ribs that now felt different, lighter but more vulnerable. By the time I reached my locker, a group of girls nearby paused in mid-conversation, their heads turning almost simultaneously. I froze, my fingers lingering on the cold metal, trying to appear casual while internally panicking. One of them, a girl I had known since freshman year, raised an eyebrow and smiled softly, almost knowingly. "Hey, you're looking different today," she said, tilting her head, eyes sparkling with curiosity rather than judgment. My throat went dry, and I forced a laugh that came out higher-pitched than usual, the sound foreign even to me. Yeah, just trying something new," I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. The bell signaling the start of the next class was mercifully loud, giving me an excuse to slip away, but the encounter left me rattled. I had never imagined that a simple acknowledgement from a peer could feel like a verdict. As I navigated the classroom, sliding into a seat at the back, I couldn't stop staring at myself in the reflection of my notebook's cover. My hands, delicate and smaller than before, hovered nervously over my pencil, gripping it like a lifeline. Every feature of my face seemed magnified in this new light: the softness of my jaw, the gentle curve of my eyebrows, the hint of color in my cheeks that hadn't been there before. The teacher began the lesson, oblivious to the internal storm raging within me. I tried to focus, tried to pretend that nothing had changed, but every glance from my classmates made my stomach twist. I caught a boy who had always been friendly, one of the few who had spoken to me regularly, staring with wide eyes. For a moment, our gazes locked, and I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. His expression softened into a smile, but it was cautious, almost tentative, as if he wasn't sure who I was anymore. And maybe he wasn't, because I wasn't the same person he had known. I wasn't the same person anyone had known. By the end of class, whispers had begun to circulate, subtle but unmistakable. I could hear fragments. "Is that? I can't tell. Wow, she looks different." My name had changed in their mouths, without me saying a word. I was becoming someone else in their perception, and that realization made my heart race with both fear and anticipation. Walking to the cafeteria, I felt every eye on me, the weight of scrutiny pressing down like a physical force. It was terrifying, yet at the same time, there was an odd thrill in being noticed, in feeling undeniably present for the first time in my life. Sitting down with the few friends who had always been close to me, I struggled to maintain composure. Their faces were a mix of surprise and curiosity, some clearly trying to hide their astonishment, others failing spectacularly. I laughed nervously at a comment someone made about a recent homework assignment, but it sounded different, lighter, softer. my voice betraying the new reality I was living in. I could feel the change in the way they listened, the way their attention lingered on me in ways it never had before. This was new power, but it was unsteady, fragile, and utterly foreign. As the day wore on, I found myself navigating a maze of social dynamics I had never anticipated. Every interaction was layered with unspoken questions, subtle tests of recognition, and cautious curiosity. Some classmates treated me as if nothing had changed, almost willfully ignoring the difference, while others looked at me like I was a puzzle they couldn't solve. I began to experiment cautiously, adjusting my posture, the tilt of my head, the way I moved my hands, testing how this new form of myself could command the room without drawing unwanted attention. Each small adjustment felt like a discovery, a map of my new identity taking shape in real time. Yet, beneath all the excitement and curiosity, there was an undercurrent of fear. This transformation wasn't reversible, or, at least, I didn't know if it was. I couldn't predict what would happen next, what the boundaries of this new existence were. I was learning to navigate a body and persona that felt both thrilling and terrifyingly delicate, like walking on ice over a dark, unknowable lake. And through it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching, waiting for me to slip up, to reveal that I wasn't who everyone thought I was becoming. By the end of the school day, I had begun to accept that life would not return to the familiar normal I had known. I had crossed a threshold, and each step forward felt like venturing further into a world that was both exhilarating and frightening. I walked home slowly, the autumn sunlight casting long shadows across the pavement, my thoughts a tangled mix of fear, curiosity, and wonder. I traced the outline of my reflection in store windows, marveling at the way this new self moved, breathed, and existed. And deep down, I realized that the challenge ahead wasn't just about surviving this transformation, but about discovering who I truly was in the process and whether I could embrace the unexpected freedom it offered. The evening after that first overwhelming day at school, I found myself standing in front of my bedroom mirror, long after my parents had gone to bed. The room was quiet, bathed in the warm glow of my desk lamp, but inside me, the storm of the day raged on. I traced the contours of my face with trembling fingers, feeling every soft curve, every delicate line as though learning a new language. I still couldn't believe it. My body, my voice, even the way I carried myself had changed completely. And yet, there was a strange sense of exhilaration in it, an almost magnetic pull that urged me to explore further. I sat down on the edge of my bed, running my hands through my hair. It fell like silk between my fingers, soft and heavy, brushing against my shoulders in a way that sent shivers down my spine. My reflection in the mirror was mesmerizing. There was a light in my eyes, something I hadn't noticed before, a spark of confidence, curiosity, and an unspoken question. Who was I now? I had been forced into this new form, this new identity, but the truth was that I didn't yet know what it meant to be me in this body. I didn't know how to own it, how to walk through the world without fear, without constantly measuring every movement and every glance. The next morning, I awoke with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. I had spent hours the night before experimenting in front of the mirror, adjusting my hair, testing how my voice sounded when I spoke softly, laughing lightly to hear the sound. I had discovered subtle power in the way people reacted to me now, a curiosity and attention that I had never experienced before. But with that power came pressure, a weight that made me acutely aware of how delicate this balance was. One wrong word, one misplaced glance, and everything could unravel. Walking into school again felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone was watching, waiting to see how I would perform. The halls were buzzing, students chattering and laughing, but I felt like I was moving through a separate world, invisible yet hypervisible at the same time. I noticed how people stepped aside for me in small, almost imperceptible ways, how their eyes lingered on me longer than usual. I realized that my transformation had given me more than just a new body. It had given me a presence, a subtle force that shifted the environment around me. It was both thrilling and frightening, a power I wasn't sure I was ready to wield. During lunch, I found a quiet spot outside, sitting on a bench under a tree, away from the crowded cafeteria. The cool breeze tugged gently at my hair, and for the first time, I allowed myself to breathe, to think without the constant scrutiny of others. I ran my fingers over my arms, feeling the softness of my skin, and marveled at how different everything felt. There was a new rhythm to my movements, a grace I hadn't known I possessed. I tried a small smile at my reflection in the window pane across from me, and it smiled back, someone familiar, yet completely transformed. As the days passed, I began to experiment more boldly. I tried new outfits, adjusting styles that accentuated my new shape, learning what worked and what felt natural. Each change felt like a conversation with myself, a dialogue between the person I had been and the person I was becoming. I discovered that even simple things, like the tilt of my head or the way I walked down the hallway, could communicate confidence, curiosity, or caution. Every choice mattered, every gesture held weight, and every reaction from others became a subtle map of how I was perceived. It wasn't all confidence and curiosity, though. There were moments of sharp, biting fear. I caught whispers in the hallways, glimpses of expressions that made my stomach twist. I wondered if I would ever truly fit in, if people would ever see me as more than a novelty, a curiosity to be gawked at. At night, I often lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this change was permanent or if tomorrow would undo everything. And yet, despite the fear, I couldn't deny the thrill of being noticed, of existing in a way I had never dared before. Then came the first real test of my confidence, a school presentation I had been dreading for weeks. Normally, I would have shrunk into myself, avoided eye contact, and stumbled over my words. But now, as I stood at the front of the classroom, I felt something shift inside me. My posture was different, lighter, more poised. I could feel the subtle sway of my hair as I gestured, the softness in my hands that somehow conveyed warmth rather than weakness. The room felt different under my gaze. The faces of my classmates seemed curious and attentive rather than judgmental. I spoke, and my voice, higher and clearer than before, carried naturally. I realized with a shock that I was commanding attention not through force, but simply by being present, by embracing this new version of myself. The applause at the end of the presentation was small but genuine. My chest swelled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. I had faced one of my greatest fears, and in doing so, discovered that this new identity, this transformed self, could not only survive scrutiny, but thrive under it. The realization hit me with the force of a wave. Maybe this change wasn't just a challenge. Maybe it was an opportunity, a chance to discover aspects of myself I had never known. And for the first time since the transformation began, I felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile, shining hope, that I could navigate this world, not as the person I had been, but as the person I was becoming. The following week brought a strange mixture of routine and revelation. By now, the initial shock of my transformation had settled into a cautious rhythm. Each morning, I prepared carefully, studying my reflection, adjusting my clothes, brushing my hair in a way that felt natural yet deliberate. I had begun to understand that this wasn't just about appearances. It was about presence, about inhabiting a form that commanded attention, curiosity, and sometimes even admiration. But even as I grew more confident, there remained the constant undercurrent of uncertainty. I didn't know how permanent this was, or how far it would reshape my life. It was during lunch one afternoon that I realized how deeply this transformation had begun to affect my relationships. I had chosen a spot on the far side of the courtyard, watching students mill about, laughing and sharing stories, and yet I felt separate from it all, both inside and out. Then she came, Elena, a classmate I had never really spoken to before, someone whose confidence and warmth had always drawn others toward her. She smiled at me as she approached, and for a moment, my heart tripped over itself. "Hey," she said lightly, dropping onto the bench beside me. "You're different today." Her tone was teasing, but there was genuine curiosity there, and for some reason, that simple observation made me nervous. I laughed softly, the sound still unfamiliar to my own ears, and shrugged. "Yeah, I guess I am," I admitted. There was something liberating in acknowledging it, in letting someone else see me as I was now without explanation or apology. Elena tilted her head, studying me for a moment, then smiled warmly. "I like it," she said simply. That one sentence, casual yet sincere, sent a ripple through me. For the first time, I felt accepted without needing to hide behind excuses, to pretend nothing had changed. Our conversation drifted easily, flowing from classes to hobbies, and for the first time, I realized that this transformation was not just about how I looked. It was about how I could connect with others, how I could navigate social spaces in ways I never had before. I began to notice subtleties in my own behavior, the way my gestures now seemed more expressive, the way my words carried a new lightness. Every small movement felt like a message, every glance a potential connection. I was learning to communicate in ways I hadn't imagined, discovering a side of myself that had always been dormant. By the end of lunch, Elena had invited me to join a group of friends for an after-school project, a small moment that might have seemed trivial on the surface, but for me, it was monumental. Being included, being chosen, was a confirmation that my new self could exist in the social world without fear, without hiding. And yet, alongside that thrill, there was still fear, a nagging voice whispering that not everyone would be as accepting, that at any moment, a mistake could undo everything. As the days passed, I experimented more deliberately with self-expression. I tried different hairstyles, outfits, and ways of carrying myself, observing the subtle shifts in others' reactions. Some people were clearly intrigued, some cautiously supportive, and a few remained distant, wary of the change. Each interaction was a lesson, a map of social dynamics I had never navigated before. And with each small victory, a compliment, a smile, a conversation that flowed naturally, I felt my confidence deepen. I was beginning to understand that this transformation was not just physical, it was an opportunity to explore the person I wanted to become, to challenge old insecurities and fears. One evening, I found myself sitting in my room, reflecting on everything that had happened. The transformation had brought moments of fear, of uncertainty, but also moments of profound discovery. I realized that I was learning to inhabit a self that was not just new, but fully alive in ways I had never experienced. There was a growing sense of alignment between how I felt inside and how I presented myself to the world. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant awareness, but it was exhilarating to feel that I was shaping my own identity, defining myself not by who I had been, but by who I could become. The culmination of these realizations came unexpectedly during a small school event. I had been asked to speak briefly, to introduce a segment of the program. Normally, the thought would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety, but this time, I felt a quiet steadiness. Standing in front of the audience, I felt the familiar rush of nerves, but it was tempered by a growing sense of command. My movements were fluid, my voice clear and confident, my gestures expressive without exaggeration. As I looked out over the crowd, I noticed nods of attention, smiles of approval, and even a few expressions of surprise at my composure. In that moment, I realized that the transformation had given me more than a new body. It had given me the courage to inhabit my own story, to step fully into the person I was meant to be. Walking home that evening, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I felt a deep, unshakable sense of possibility. I had faced fear, navigated uncertainty, and discovered strengths I hadn't known existed. The journey wasn't over, and the future remained unpredictable, but for the first time since the transformation began, I felt like I had agency. I could move through the world with intention, with presence, and with the knowledge that this new identity, while different and unfamiliar, was still undeniably, profoundly me. The following week brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. With my new identity becoming more visible, the attention I received at school intensified. Some of it was positive, small acknowledgments, friendly conversations, smiles that made my chest swell with unexpected warmth. But there were also moments of scrutiny, whispers in the hallways, and the occasional skeptical glance that reminded me this transformation wasn't without its complications. I realized that being different came with both power and responsibility, a double-edged sword I was still learning to wield. It was during math class that the first real test came. The teacher had assigned a group project, and I was paired with classmates I had never interacted with closely. Normally, I would have shrunk into the background, content to let others take the lead. But this time, something inside me urged otherwise. My new presence carried a subtle confidence, and as we began to discuss the project, I found my voice flowing naturally. I suggested ideas, asked questions, and even laughed freely, noticing how my gestures and expressions seemed to draw the others in. They listened, engaged, and respected my input. I felt a rush of triumph, a quiet affirmation that this new self could navigate spaces I had once feared. Yet the victory was tempered by anxiety. Later that day, as I walked through the crowded hallway, I overheard a group of students whispering my name. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm me. But instead of running, I paused, took a deep breath, and continued forward with my head held high. I realized then that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving through it, embracing it, and choosing to be seen despite it. The emotional intensity of this period reached a peak during a school social event. The auditorium was alive with chatter, laughter, and music, and I felt every eye on me as I entered. The room seemed enormous, and for a fleeting moment, I wanted to turn and run. But then I caught sight of Elena, smiling warmly, and I remembered all the moments over the past week when I had faced fear and emerged stronger. Slowly, I made my way through the crowd, each step a small act of defiance against doubt and uncertainty. As the evening progressed, I found myself drawn into conversations and activities I would have once avoided. I discovered that the transformation had not only changed how others perceived me, but how I perceived myself. I could express emotions more freely, connect with others more deeply, and even embrace laughter without hesitation. The fear that had gripped me at the start of this journey was still present, a faint echo, but it no longer dictated my actions. I was learning to exist fully in this new self, to inhabit it without apology or hesitation. However, the night wasn't without its complications. A confrontation with a group of students who had been skeptical of my transformation tested my confidence in ways I hadn't anticipated. Their questions and teasing remarks were sharp, probing, and sometimes cruel, forcing me to defend my presence and assert my identity. I felt the familiar rush of fear, the old insecurities threatening to surface. But this time, I drew strength from the weeks of growth I had experienced. I responded calmly, clearly, and confidently, letting my words and demeanor speak louder than any fear. To my relief, the confrontation ended without incident, leaving me with a sense of quiet pride and reinforced self-assurance. By the time I left the event and walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, I felt a profound shift within myself. The journey had been more than a physical transformation. It had been an emotional and psychological awakening. I had faced fear, navigated scrutiny, embraced curiosity, and discovered a resilience I hadn't known existed. My reflection in the shop windows along the way showed a person transformed, not only in appearance but in spirit. There was still uncertainty ahead, and the world remained unpredictable. But for the first time, I felt equipped to face it head-on. Sitting by my bedroom window that night, looking out at the quiet streets, I reflected on everything that had happened. I realized that transformation, whether sudden or gradual, was not just about change, it was about discovery. I had discovered courage, resilience, and the power of embracing who I truly was, regardless of external expectations. The path ahead remained unknown, full of challenges and surprises, but I no longer feared it. Instead, I felt ready to step forward, to navigate this new reality with curiosity, strength, and the knowledge that I had grown in ways I had never imagined. And as sleep finally claimed me, I felt a quiet excitement for the days to come. The journey was far from over, but I had learned an essential truth. Change is not something to fear, but something to embrace, explore, and ultimately, to own. And in owning it, I was no longer just surviving, I was beginning to thrive. The days that followed brought a new kind of rhythm. I had settled into a pattern of self-discovery, balancing fear with curiosity, anxiety with exhilaration. Every morning, I would look in the mirror and study the reflection before me, tracing the contours of my face, feeling the subtle movements of my body, listening to the sound of my voice as it now carried a warmth and clarity I had never known. I was no longer the person who had wandered the hallways in fear and uncertainty. I was someone new, someone capable of standing tall in a world that had once felt overwhelmingly large. School had become a place of exploration. Friends, old and new, treated me with a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and acceptance. I could see how my confidence influenced their perception of me. A simple smile, a gentle gesture, or a well-placed comment could shift the atmosphere of a room. I was learning the delicate art of presence, not dominance, not performance, but authentic engagement. I had begun to understand that this transformation, though sudden and shocking, was not merely external. It was a revelation of who I could be, a mirror reflecting not just my appearance but my potential, my resilience, my capacity for connection. There were still challenges. Moments of doubt would creep in, small pangs of insecurity when a glance lingered too long or a whisper reached my ears. But each time, I reminded myself of the journey I had taken, from fear to curiosity, from uncertainty to courage. I had faced scrutiny, navigated confrontation, and discovered a quiet power in being seen. I had learned to own my space, to move through the world with intention, and to trust in the strength of my own presence. One afternoon, during a group project, I noticed how naturally I had adapted to collaboration. I suggested ideas, offered insights, and listened with genuine interest, and for the first time, I realized that my transformation had given me more than confidence. It had given me empathy. I was able to perceive subtle emotions, to sense hesitation or excitement, and to respond in ways that encouraged trust and openness. My relationships with classmates deepened, and I began to understand that connection was the true measure of this new self. Presence alone was not enough. It was how I engaged with others, how I shared my voice and attention, that defined who I had become. The final test of my transformation came unexpectedly. The school organized a talent showcase, and a friend encouraged me to participate, suggesting that I share a short story I had written. Normally, the thought would have terrified me. Public speaking, creative expression, being judged by peers, these had once been minefields of anxiety. But now, I felt a calm determination. I prepared my story carefully, rehearsing in front of the mirror, adjusting gestures, and finding the cadence of my voice that felt authentic. When the day arrived, I stepped onto the stage with steady breath and a quiet confidence, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves tempered by a profound inner strength. As I spoke, the room fell silent, the audience captivated not just by the story, but by the presence I carried. My gestures, my expressions, my voice, all flowed naturally, effortlessly, and I realized that the transformation had gifted me something far greater than physical change. It had given me the courage to be fully myself, to express, connect, and lead in ways I had never imagined. When I finished, the applause was genuine, heartfelt, and I felt a warmth that spread through me, a sense of belonging and accomplishment that transcended the physical. Walking home that evening, the sky painted in fading hues of gold and pink, I felt a quiet joy. I had faced fear, embraced change, and discovered a self I had never known. The journey had been filled with uncertainty, suspense, and emotional trials, but it had also been rich with discovery, growth, and empowerment. I understood now that transformation is not merely a matter of appearance. It is a journey of courage, connection, and self-realization. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on everything I had experienced. I was no longer just a student at school, an observer in the hallways, or a shadow among peers. I was someone new, someone fully present, someone capable of navigating the world with awareness, empathy, and confidence. The transformation had given me more than a body or a voice. It had given me a perspective, a profound understanding of what it meant to inhabit oneself fully and authentically. And as sleep finally took me, I carried with me a sense of possibility. The future remained unpredictable, filled with challenges, surprises, and unknown encounters. But I no longer feared it. I had learned that true strength lies not in resisting change, but in embracing it, exploring it, and discovering the depth of one's own identity. I was ready to step forward, to live fully in this new life, to meet the world as the person I had become. And in that realization, I felt a quiet, enduring peace, the knowledge that transformation, though startling and uncertain, could lead to the truest version of oneself.